Good evening. Welcome to the Midnight Paperback. The water you see is not here to show you the story. It is here to keep you company while you listen. So dim the lights, let the tank settle. And when you're ready, let's open tonight's paperback. Tonight's paperback, The Case of the Vanishing Confession. At 11:43 on a Thursday night, Detective Silas Creed began recording the confession of a man who claimed to have murdered Judith Ames 27 years earlier. At 11:58, the chair opposite him was empty. The confession remained on the cassette. When Creed played it back, every word was spoken in his own voice. Part 1. The Man Who Asked for Creed. Jonas Bell entered Central Division at 11:43 on a Thursday night and asked to confess to a murder no one had mentioned in 27 years. The desk officer looked up from a crossword puzzle and asked which murder. Bell answered quietly, Judith Ames. The name carried farther than his voice. It reached the open door of the detective's room, where Silas Creed sat alone beneath a green-shaded lamp, filling the last page of a report he had no intention of finishing that night. His pen stopped. For several seconds, the station continued without him. A telephone rang in records. Somewhere beyond the holding cells, a prisoner demanded water. The radiator behind Creed's chair clicked twice and settled. Then Creed stood. He had been 29 when Judith Ames was killed. A newly promoted detective with an ill-fitting suit, a borrowed desk, and a habit of believing that every unanswered question had merely been asked badly. 27 years had cured him of most of that. It had not cured him of Judith Ames. Her file occupied less than 3 inches of shelf space. Her death had occupied most of his career. Creed stepped into the corridor and saw an elderly man waiting beside the desk. Bell wore a dark wool coat buttoned to the throat. His hair was thin and combed straight back. He held no hat, no bag, and no papers. His hands rested calmly at his sides. He did not look like a man surrendering. He looked like a man who had arrived for an appointment. "You asked for me," Creed said. Bell raised his eyes. "Detective Creed." Creed studied him. "Have we met?" "Not properly." The desk officer turned his crossword page. Creed asked Bell whether he understood what he had come to say. "I understand. Do you want a solicitor?" "No." "Have you been drinking?" "No." "Have you taken anything tonight?" "No." Bell's answers were clean and immediate. No confusion, no performance. His voice was low, worn smooth by age, but his eyes remained attentive. Creed gestured toward the secure corridor. "Come with me." Bell followed. The interview room was the smaller of two, a narrow place with painted brick walls and a steel table fixed to the floor. A cassette recorder sat at one end beneath a wire grill. The station had newer equipment upstairs, but Central Division trusted machines that made a sound when they worked. Creed closed the door and turned the bolt. Bell sat opposite him. Creed opened a fresh cassette, placed it in the recorder, and pressed record. The reels began to turn. He stated the date, the time, the room, his name, and the name Bell had given at the front desk. Then he leaned back. "Tell me about Judith Ames." Bell looked down at the table. "She worked in police records." That was never a secret. "She stayed late on Tuesdays because the weekly index cards came down from major crimes after 5. Creed said nothing. Bell continued. "She used a red pencil for corrections. She sharpened it with a small brass blade instead of the office sharpener because she said the machine ate the wood unevenly." Creed had seen the pencil in the evidence photograph. Half its red paint had been bitten away near the eraser. A single curled shaving lay beside it on the blotter. The newspapers had never mentioned it. "Go on," Creed said. Bell closed his eyes briefly. Her left shoe was beneath the desk. Creed's right hand tightened around his pen. What about it? The heel rubbed her foot. She took it off while she worked. That could be guessed. She tied the lace once around the front leg of her chair so the shoe would not slide underneath. The room changed. Nothing visible moved. The recorder turned. The radiator pipe behind the wall gave a dull knock. Bell remained seated with his hands on the table. But the interview was no longer a conversation Creed could dismiss. The tied shoe had appeared in 3 crime scene photographs and nowhere else. It had been omitted from the typed summary because the first investigators considered it irrelevant. Creed had kept it out of later briefings because private details were useful when measuring false confessions. Over the years, 5 people had claimed to kill Judith Ames. One had described a blue dress. She had worn brown. One had said she was found in an alley. 2 had copied details from newspaper reports. The 5th had known she worked in police records and nothing more. No one had mentioned the shoe. Creed set his pen down. Where was Judith when you entered the room? At her desk. Alive? Yes? What was she doing? Correcting cards. What did she say? Bell's face tightened. She asked why I was still there. Creed waited. Bell's gaze moved to the recorder. She said the building felt different after midnight. She said every empty office sounded occupied. Creed knew the line was impossible to verify. It also did not sound designed to impress him. Why did you kill her? Bell rubbed one thumb over the knuckle of the other. I was frightened. Of Judith? Of what she had found. What did she find? Bell did not answer. Creed let the silence remain practical. Interview rooms were full of people who hurried to fill empty air. Bell did not. Creed changed direction. How did you know to ask for me? You kept her case open. You followed the investigation? Yes. For 27 years? Bell met his eyes. For longer than I intended. There was no pride in him. No private amusement. The men who had confessed falsely usually watched for Creed's reaction. They wanted to see whether the lie had landed. Bell watched only the recorder. Creed took him through the room again. The position of the desk. The locked records cabinets. Judith's coat on the wall hook. The red pencil. The shoe. Bell supplied details without embellishment. He said Judith had been struck once behind the ear with the brass base of a desk stamp. The injury had not killed her immediately. She had fallen against the filing cabinet and pulled one drawer open as she went down. Creed knew that too. The drawer had contained unsorted interview cards. Bell said Judith had tried to crawl toward the door. Creed knew the marks on the floor. Bell said he had knelt beside her. What did she say then? Creed asked. Bell's voice became almost too soft for the machine. She asked me to put the cards back in order. Creed looked at him. That detail had not appeared anywhere, not even in the private file. It could not be tested. That made it worse. Creed stopped the interview 43 minutes after it began. He read Bell the caution again and asked whether he wished to change any part of his statement. No. Do you understand that this recording will be treated as evidence? Yes. It may be used against you. I know. Creed pressed stop. The reel slowed. Bell looked at the cassette through the recorder's plastic window. Will you enter it tonight? Creed studied him. Why does that matter? I want it done properly. That concern comes late. Bell accepted the rebuke without protest. Creed removed the cassette. He wrote the Ames case number across the label, then placed it inside a clear evidence sleeve. Bell watched every movement. Creed sealed the flap. He signed across the adhesive strip. The final stroke of his surname fell lower than the rest, as it always did. He entered the time beneath it, 11:58 p.m. Bell released a breath. It was the first sign of relief Creed had seen in him. "Then this one belongs to you," Bell said. The recorder clicked. Creed looked down. The machine was empty. The cassette rested inside the sealed sleeve beneath his hand. He looked up. The chair opposite him was vacant. Creed did not move at first. Bell's coat was gone. The slight hollow where his hands had rested on the table remained visible in the grime. Nothing else suggested a man had occupied the room. Creed reached for the door. The bolt was still turned. He unlocked it and stepped into the corridor. The secure hall ran 20 feet in either direction. One end led to the detective's room. The other ended at a barred gate controlled from the front desk. Both were empty. Creed crossed to the duty station. The desk officer looked up. "The old man," Creed said. "Where did he go?" "What old man?" "The one you admitted 10 minutes ago." The officer frowned. "I didn't admit anyone." "You spoke to him." "I've been here all night." Creed stared at the open crossword puzzle. The officer's pencil rested across the same clue he had been working when Bell arrived. Creed pulled the arrival log toward him. There should have been an entry between a delivery driver at 11:26 and a patrol officer returning at midnight 4. A pale horizontal mark divided the lines. Creed bent closer. The pressure of writing remained impressed in the sheet. He could feel it beneath his fingertip. On the page below, faint grooves marked the shape of letters. The ink itself had thinned to a gray wash. The officer watched him. "What are you looking for?" Creed lifted the evidence sleeve. "Call Detective Lennox." Mara arrived 12 minutes later with her coat over one arm and sleep still pressed into the left side of her face. She had worked with Creed for 6 years, long enough to know when he had reached a conclusion and when he was still trying to prevent one. Tonight, he had neither. He showed her the empty room. He showed her the locked window and the solid vent. He showed her the fading line in the arrival log. Mara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she looked at the evidence sleeve. "The confession?" Creed nodded. "You sealed it yourself?" "Yes." "And he vanished after?" "Yes." Mara took a slow breath. "Let's listen before we call anyone else." They returned to the interview room. Creed broke the seal. He removed the cassette and placed it back in the recorder. Mara stood beside him. Creed pressed play. His own voice filled the room. "My name is Silas Creed." The voice came from the machine with the flat, narrow quality of magnetic tape, but it was unmistakably his. "I killed Judith Ames in the police records office 27 years ago." Mara turned toward him. Creed did not. The confession continued. His voice described the red pencil. His voice described the drawer opening as Judith fell. His voice described the shoe tied once around the leg of the chair. He heard the faint whistle that passed through his front teeth when he said the word records. He heard the old regional vowel he had trained out of his speech before his first promotion. At one point, the voice hesitated before saying Judith's name. Creed knew that hesitation. It belonged to him. The tape reached the final seconds. There was a pause. Then Jonas Bell's voice said, "Then this one belongs to you." The reels turned another inch. The cassette stopped. Part 2. The voice on the tape. Mara replayed the recording 3 times. On the second pass, she sat across from Creed with a notebook open, marking each place where his voice breathed, paused, or changed pitch. On the third, she stopped writing. "There are explanations," she said. "Name one." "He could imitate you." "You heard him speak." "For 43 minutes?" "I heard enough." Mara looked at the recorder. He could have switched the tape. The sleeve was sealed. You might have recorded over it without realizing. I stated the interview at the beginning. That part could be older. The cassette was new. You're certain? I opened the wrapping in front of him. Mara closed the notebook. Her eyes had moved past disbelief. They were searching for a version of events that would not require either of them to accuse the other. Do you remember saying any of it? She asked. No. Do you remember Judith Ames? Creed looked at her. Yes. That isn't what I meant. I know. Mara stood. We need the original file. Records occupied the station's lowest floor, where the ceiling pipes had been painted so often their joints looked rounded. At that hour, one clerk remained on duty, preparing morning requests. She recognized Creed and brought the Ames boxes without asking why. There were 4. Creed remembered 3. The 4th was thinner and carried no typed label, only the case number written in fading blue ink. Mara noticed his expression. You've never seen that one? No. They began with the main file. Judith Ames had been 24 years old. Police records clerk, unmarried, no children, no known enemies. She rented a room in a narrow house 6 blocks from the station and walked to work in all weather because she disliked buses. The first photograph showed her desk. Red pencil, brass desk stamp, open drawer, the shoe beneath the chair, its lace tied once around the leg. Creed turned the photograph face down. Mara opened the chain of custody section. Silas. He looked. The first evidence transfer bore his signature. The date beside it was 27 years old. Creed took the page from her. The signature was not merely similar. The final line of the surname crossed low, exactly as it had on the new cassette sleeve. The records clerk leaned over Mara's shoulder. That yours? Creed did not answer. The clerk looked at him. I've seen your signature, often enough. I wasn't assigned to this case on that date. She checked the typed header. It says you were. It's wrong. The clerk's expression closed slightly. Records clerks did not like detectives telling them that paper was wrong. Paper was the only witness they trusted. Mara removed Creed's present evidence sleeve from her coat pocket and placed it beside the old page. The signatures matched. Same pressure. Same low crossing stroke. Same slight break before the final letter. Creed looked at the date again. He had been on the force then, but he had not yet transferred to major crimes. On the night Judith died, he had been working a burglary in the Northern District. He remembered the address. He remembered the broken greenhouse window. He remembered the elderly owner insisting that the missing silver had been stolen by a nephew who had been dead for 8 years. That memory remained clean. The paper disagreed. The records clerk touched the old custody form. This has always been here. Creed looked at her. You remember seeing it? I remember your name in this file. When? She hesitated. I don't know. Mara closed the folder. We need to speak to the roommate. Judith's former roommate lived in a brick bungalow near the river. She was 71 now, with the white hair cut square beneath the ears and a careful way of opening the door only as far as the chain allowed. Mara introduced them. The woman looked past her. Her eyes found Creed. The color left her face. You. Creed felt Mara turn slightly beside him. Do you remember me? He asked. The chain remained fastened. You came to the house. When? After Judith died. Creed kept his voice level. I never came here. The woman's hand tightened around the edge of the door. You sat in the front room. What did we discuss? You asked about her shoes. Creed said nothing. You kept asking why she tied the left one to the chair. Mara glanced at him. The woman continued. I told you the heel rubbed. I told you she had done it since school. You asked again anyway. Creed heard the question as he had asked it less than 2 hours earlier. What was unusual about the shoe? He had asked Bell 3 times. Did another detective come with me? Creed said. No. Did you speak to a man named Jonas Bell? The woman stared. I don't know that name. He may have been older than I was. You were the detective. I wasn't assigned until later. The woman's voice dropped low and level. You held her shoe by the lace. Creed looked at Mara. Mara's face had changed. Until then, she had been defending him against a machine and a sheet of paper. A frightened woman's memory was different. It looked back. The former roommate began closing the door. Creed stopped her with one final question. What did Judith do with misfiled index cards? The woman paused. She corrected them and read. Did she ever bring work home? Once. What was it? I don't know. A card with the wrong name. Whose name? She wouldn't say. The door closed. The chain slid free only after the lock had turned. Mara waited until they were in the car. You never met her? No. She remembered you? I heard. She remembered the same question you asked Bell. I heard that too. Mara placed both hands on the steering wheel but did not start the engine. Did you know Judith before the case? No. Think before you answer. Creed looked through the windscreen at the closed curtains of the bungalow. I knew her the way the file knew her, he said. Her name, her desk, what was left beneath it. That is all? She started the car. Neither spoke on the drive back. At Central Division, a message waited from the superintendent. Creed was to surrender the cassette and remove himself from the Ames investigation, pending review. Mara read the order twice. They moved quickly. They heard the tape. They think it's a confession. It is a confession. In your voice. That will be enough. Mara looked at him. It shouldn't be. Creed opened the thin fourth box from records. Inside were old administrative papers, duty rosters, personnel transfers, property requests, and a group photograph mounted on stiff card. 12 detectives stood on the steps of Central Division. Creed recognized 3 dead men and 1 retired superintendent. Near the back stood Jonas Bell. He was perhaps 35 in the photograph, broad through the shoulders, his dark hair parted neatly to one side. The face was younger, but the eyes were the same. Creed read the typed names beneath the image. Detective Jonas Bell, Major Crimes. The photograph had been taken during the year Judith Ames died. Mara leaned over the box. He was police. Creed pulled the old duty roster. Bell's name appeared beside the Ames case number, primary investigator. 3 weeks later, his name vanished from every schedule. No resignation, no dismissal, no retirement. The personnel file ended with an unsigned transfer request and 1 blank page. Mara sat back. He wasn't the murderer. Creed looked at Bell's younger face. No. He was the detective. The sentence rearranged the entire night. Bell's precise language, his interest in the evidence sleeve, the relief when Creed signed. You kept her case open. Creed had believed a murderer had followed the investigation for 27 years. The truth was quieter. Jonas Bell had begun it. Part 3. The previous detective. The evidence ledger listed 1 cassette among the property collected during the first week of Judith's murder investigation. Interview recording. No suspect name. No charge. The property number led to the 4th sub-basement, where unclaimed and misfiled evidence waited beneath pipes that sweated rust-colored water. Creed and Mara searched for nearly an hour. The carton was not filed under Ames. It sat behind a row of burglary exhibits in a box marked Office Supplies. Inside lay a single cassette. The plastic had yellowed. The paper label carried the Ames case number in blue ink and the initials JB. A signature crossed the custody strip, Jonas Bell. The final stroke had faded, but the name remained legible. Mara held it beneath the fluorescent light. So the form changed to yours, but this didn't. Not yet. She looked at him. Creed had not intended to say the last two words. He took the cassette. The manufacturer had stopped producing that model years ago. Its screws were tarnished. One corner of the label had lifted from the plastic. It was not the cassette Bell had recorded in the interview room. Two different objects, 27 years apart. Creed found an old player on a shelf beside the evidence desk. He cleaned the heads with a cotton swab, inserted the cassette, and pressed play. Room tone emerged first. A chair scraped, paper shifted. Then a clerk's voice stated the date. The date was 3 days after Judith Ames died. Interview conducted in Room 2, Central Division, regarding the murder of Judith Ames. Present are Detective Jonas Bell and... The room tone continued. No static interrupted it. No tape stretched. The clerk's sentence simply contained a clean absence where the suspect's name should have been. Then the voice resumed. Who has agreed to provide a statement voluntarily? Mara stopped the tape. Play that again. Creed rewound several seconds. The clerk announced Bell, then nothing. The silence was too exact to be damage. The air in the room remained audible beneath it. A pipe knocked faintly in the background. Someone coughed beyond the door. Only the name was missing. Creed pressed play again. The confession began. My name is Jonas Bell. Mara looked at him. Bell's younger voice was fuller, but unmistakable. I killed Judith Ames in the police records office. The wording matched the confession Creed had recorded that night. Bell described the red pencil. Bell described the brass desk stamp. Bell described Judith falling against the open drawer. Bell described the left shoe tied once around the chair leg. The same pauses, the same order, the same sentence about the card. She asked me to put them back in order. Creed stopped the tape. For several moments, neither detective spoke. Mara placed the new cassette beside the old one. Different plastic, different labels, different recording dates, the same confession. The old recording spoke in Bell's voice. The new one spoke in Creed's. Mara pointed to the erased name in the clerk's introduction. That was the murderer. Yes. Bell recorded him. Yes. And afterward, the tape changed. Creed looked at the two custody signatures. Bell's on the old cassette, his own on the new one. He accepted it into evidence, Creed said. Mara followed his gaze. He signed for the confession. And then the records began making it his. The voice first. The voice first. The custody form after. The witness. Mara looked toward the stairwell as though Bell might still be somewhere above them. How did he leave the locked room? Creed thought of the duty officer staring at the fading arrival log. The gate had not opened for Bell. No one had watched him cross the secure hall. No one except Creed could remember that a prisoner had occupied the room at all. He didn't escape the room, Creed said. Mara waited. The station stopped keeping him inside it. She frowned. Creed touched the new cassette. When I signed, the confession became mine. Bell stopped being the man who had brought it. The officer forgot admitting him. His name left the log. When the door opened, no one remembered a prisoner walking out. You remember? I took his place. The words settled without drama. Creed looked at his own signature on the new sleeve. the low final stroke, the small break before the last letter, and read it like a stranger's handwriting that happened to be his. Somewhere in the building, a record was already deciding he had always been here. The clerk remembered his name in a file he had never touched. By morning, the roster might remember it too. He had spent his career trusting that evidence outlived belief. He had never expected to be the thing it outlived. Mara stared at the cassettes. "What if we burn them?" Creed almost answered immediately. Then he looked again at the yellowed plastic of the old recording and the clear shell of the new one. 2 tapes, 1 confession. "The tape isn't carrying it," he said. "What is?" "The case. That isn't an answer. It's the only one we have." He picked up the new evidence sleeve. "I could destroy this. My signature would still be on the old form. She would still remember me. The voice would remain mine in whatever copy the station has already made. No copies have been made. Not yet." Mara looked at the old cassette. "And destroying bells?" "Would remove the only proof that someone stood where I stand now." A buzzer sounded above them. The evidence room telephone rang. Mara answered. She listened, said nothing, and replaced the receiver. "Command wants us upstairs." The superintendent waited in his office with an internal affairs inspector and a transfer form already prepared. Creed remained standing. Mara sat beside the desk. The superintendent did not ask whether the tape was real. He had heard it. "You're suspended effective immediately," he said. "Detective Lennox will assume custody of the Ames evidence until Internal Affairs completes its review." The inspector pushed the form toward Mara. "Sign the receiving line." Mara took the pen. Creed watched the nib move toward the paper. He saw the entire route before it happened. Mara's signature beneath his. Mara's voice entering the confession. The old records changing again. The witness opening her door one day and recognizing Mara. Creed becoming what Bell had become. A name fading from the active case. An old photograph in a box. A man who survived because someone else had agreed to believe the evidence. "Stop," Creed said. Mara's pen paused above the line. The superintendent looked at him. "You are no longer responsible for this evidence. That is precisely why she cannot sign." The inspector leaned forward. "Detective Creed." Creed did not look at him. He looked at Mara. "Put the pen down." She did. The superintendent's face reddened. "You are obstructing an internal investigation." Creed took the transfer form and folded it once. "Assign the evidence to property. It requires an investigating officer. Then close the case." "On what basis?" Creed looked at the cassette sleeve in his hand. "On mine." The room remained still. Mara understood before the others did. "If I sign," she said, "it moves to me." The inspector turned toward her. "What moves?" Mara ignored him. Creed answered. "Yes." "You're certain?" "Yes." The superintendent stood. "This conversation is finished." Mara reached for the pen again. Creed covered the signature line with his hand. "No. I can continue the investigation." That is what he wanted me to think. "If it clears you, it will not clear me. It will make you guilty. I know what I'm choosing." "You know what you hope you are choosing." Mara looked at him. Creed's voice lowered. "Bell sat across from me and waited for my signature. He knew exactly what came after. I will not sit across from you and do the same." She withdrew her hand. The superintendent ordered both detectives out. Creed refused to leave the evidence. He returned to records under escort, placed both cassettes inside one carton, and added Bell's personnel photograph, the altered custody sheet, and a copy of the witness statement. On the final form, he wrote, "Custody retained by Detective Silas Creed, pending submission to court. He signed his name again, the pen pressed deeply enough to mark the sheet beneath. Mara stood beside him. "What are you going to do?" "Enter all of it. They'll use it against you." "They already are. We can find Bell. He spent 27 years becoming difficult to find. We can still try." Creed sealed the carton. "If I run, I prove the tape. If you stay, they convict you." "Yes." Mara's eyes hardened. "That cannot be your answer." "It is not an answer. It is a choice." He lifted the evidence carton. Bell had reached the same moment years earlier. Perhaps he had stood in this same room with another detective beside him. Perhaps he had held the first cassette and understood that innocence could be preserved if someone else signed beneath it. Bell had chosen time. Creed chose the name on the box. He carried the evidence upstairs and informed the superintendent that he possessed material concerning the murder of Judith Ames. The superintendent asked if he understood what he was doing. Creed said he did. It was the first confession of the night he was certain belonged to the man who spoke it. Then he surrendered his badge. The last page. The state accepted the confession more readily than Creed ever had. It possessed his recorded voice describing details never released to the public. It possessed a chain of custody form bearing his signature 27 years earlier. It possessed the testimony of Judith Ames's former roommate, who remembered Silas Creed holding the dead woman's shoe by its tied lace. It possessed his refusal to allow another detective to take control of the evidence. Internal Affairs called that refusal consciousness of guilt. The prosecution called it an attempt to prevent independent examination. The old cassette complicated the case without weakening it. Jonas Bell's personnel file proved that he had existed, but each surviving connection between Bell and Judith Ames became less certain as the proceedings continued. The typed roster naming him as primary investigator faded until the letters could be read only beneath angled light. A retired detective remembered Bell from major crimes but could not remember him working the Ames file. The group photograph remained. Bell stood in the back row. No one could explain why. Creed rejected a plea agreement. He testified for 2 days. He told the jury about the locked room. He told them about the fading arrival log. He played both cassettes. The first confession spoke in Jonas Bell's voice. The second spoke in his own. The strip of clean silence remained where the original suspect's name had once been. The prosecution described the silence as damage tape. Creed asked why the room tone survived inside the damage. No one answered. It did not matter. To the jury, his explanation sounded like the final construction of a man who knew too much about a murder and could not bear to hear himself admit it. Creed was convicted before the week ended. Judith Ames's case was closed. For the first time in 27 years, a name appeared beside the word offender: Silas Creed. The verdict gave the file the certainty Creed had once wanted from every confession. The certainty was complete. The truth had never looked weaker. Mara visited him 4 months later. The prison interview room was brighter than the one at Central Division. Its table was bolted to the floor. A small recorder sat near the wall for official conversations. Creed noticed the brown evidence case beneath Mara's chair. "You brought it." "I had to." "Why?" The court returned the tapes after the appeal filing. Creed looked at the case. "Who accepted them?" Mara did not answer immediately. His hands tightened beneath the table. "Who signed?" The property clerk refused. The old case could not be archived without an investigating officer closing the evidence record. "Mara." "Command assigned me." "When?" 3 days ago." Creed closed his eyes. I told you not to sign anything. I didn't take the case from you. The trial was over. The case does not know that. She leaned closer. I signed an archive sheet. That is all. That is enough. Mara opened the brown case. Inside lay the yellowed cassette from Bell's original interview. I brought this because the transcript changed. Creed looked at her. What changed? The officer's name. Bell's? No. Mara placed a portable cassette player on the table. The prison guard watched from behind the window. Creed could have told her not to play it. The warning would have arrived 3 days late. Mara inserted the cassette and pressed play. A chair scraped through the speaker. Paper shifted. The clerk's old voice announced the date. Interview conducted in Room 2, Central Division, regarding the murder of Judith Ames. Creed watched Mara. Present is Detective Jonas Bell, and... The strip of clean silence remained. The room tone passed through it untouched. Then the clerk continued. Who has agreed to provide a statement voluntarily? The confession began. My name is Mara Lennox. Mara's hand left the machine. The voice was hers. It carried the small catch in her breath before she spoke Judith's surname. It carried the tired roughness of her late shifts. It carried the flattened vowels she had brought with her from the coast and never lost. I killed Judith Ames in the police records office. Mara looked at Creed. He saw recognition arrive before fear. The voice on the tape described the red pencil. It described the brass desk stamp. It reached the chair. Mara's lips parted. She knew the next sentence. Creed saw that she knew it. The tape said, her left shoe was beneath the desk, tied once around the chair leg. Mara did not move. The confession continued. At the end, the clerk's introduction began again, though neither of them had rewound the cassette. The date was the same. The room was the same. The clean silence still concealed the prisoner's name. But the investigator's name was clear. Detective Mara Lennox. And that is where tonight's paperback ends. You've been listening to the Midnight Paperback. If this quiet shelf feels like home, subscribe and return after dark. Until the next story. Good night.